What is up, Gravity? Welcome to this week's episode of the Immerse series as we travel through kingdoms. We're looking at the Old Testament and how God has been trying to lead these Israelites into their promised land so that they can be a blessing to the nations. But in the book of Judges, we run into a lot of problems because they are now in the land of Canaan, scattered around, but there's a lot of other Canaanites that are there with them. And so we're going to look at the story of Deborah, who is one of the judges or like the leaders of Israel at the time. Not like a judge that we think of today where they're like in a courtroom, but this is like a tribal chieftain. And she was also a prophet, which is very important. And so we're going to look at this story and see some really cool details that are hiding just below the surface. And I want to explore them with you. So if you have your Immerse book, open it to page 48. But if you want to use your regular Bible, you can open up to Judges chapter 4. And so we're going to read the first paragraph of this section. It's going to set us up for this story, okay? So after Ehud's death, who was one of the previous judges, the Israelites again did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord turned them over to the king, Jabin of Hazor, a Canaanite king. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. Sisera, who had 900 iron chariots, ruthlessly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help. Now, this is crazy, I know. The evil that the Israelites were doing in the sight of the Lord was being like the Canaanites. Now, the Canaanites worshipped primarily this god called Baal, and the way that they would do that is by child sacrifice. But the way that these people saw the world was that if they sacrifice something to the gods will then return with like more crops to feed their people or more livestock. And it was kind of a transaction that they made with the gods. But obviously, this is a terrible transaction, but they were giving the best that they had in this offering. And so the Israelites became seduced by this practice, and they started doing it too. And God was not cool with that. It's weird though, because whenever it says that the Lord turned them over to King Jabin, some people translate that the Lord sold them. So why would Yahweh, who rescued them from Egypt, rescued them from slavery, sell them back into slavery? But remember that we're reading this from the perspective of the people. So whenever they saw something bad happen, they think, God is doing this bad thing to us. But this is what we have to remember. If God were to continually bless the Israelites while they're worshiping Baal, they would give credit to Baal. And so when we see God become silent at times and allow this suffering, it's a way of trying to show the Israelites that God is fake and you are destroying yourselves. And so they were suffering for 20 years under this king. And it's important to also note, Sisera, the commander of the army, had 900 iron chariots. Now, when you think of a chariot, think of tanks. This is the ancient equivalent of modern tanks. And it was also made out of iron, which means that they were technologically advanced. So this army is not messing around. These guys are big and bad, and the Israelites are in huge trouble. So now we look at who arrives upon the scene for the rescue. God is going to use this person in some really cool ways. So Deborah, the wife of Lapidoth, these weird names are just awesome. She was a prophet who was judging Israel at the time. So she's a prophet and a judge or a chief. And this is what is really interesting. She calls upon this guy named Barak to help her out because the people are like, yo, Deborah, we need some help here. Please get us out of this. Deborah's name means honeybee, and Barak's name means lightning. That is not critical to the story. I just think it's a fun fact. Please don't let that be the only thing they remember during this time. Deborah and Barak are coming together, and Deborah's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to get 10,000 guys, and we're going to strategically position ourselves next to this river, and I'm going to lure Sisera and his army of 900 chariots, and you with 10,000 men are going to defeat this guy. And Barak is like, yeah, okay, I'll do that if you come with me. And so Deborah is like, okay, very well, she replied. I will go with you, but you will receive no honor on this venture, for the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of a woman. And so Barak is like, all right, okay, this is my army. All right, I'm going to get credit for this. He doesn't say that, but I'm sure he's thinking it because he's like, aren't men supposed to like win battles or something? Anyway, the author of Judges inserts this little paragraph, this small little phrase that we need to remember in the back of our heads for the rest of the story. Now, Heber, the Kenite, a descendant of Moses' brother-in-law, Hobab, had moved away from the other members of his tribe and pitched his tent by the oak of Zananim near Kadesh. A lot of crazy words. All you need to know is that there is this guy named Heber who's living far away from his tribe. He's kind of out in the wilderness and he's got a tent. Now, Sisera apparently had some spies who discovered Barak and Deborah's plan. So he gets word that they're going to try and fight back. And so he's like, not on my watch. So he gets his army and he's like, we're going to take him out. And so then all of a sudden, Deborah is like, she wakes up Barak and she says, get ready. This is the day the Lord will give you victory over Sisera. I thought she said that the victory was going to be by the hands of a woman, but I digress. For the Lord has marched ahead of you. So Barak gets his 10,000 guys and is like, all right, we're doing this thing. They go to battle. They're fighting these guys. In the middle of the battle, Sisera bails on all of his friends. He leaves them and he tries to escape. Barak and his army defeat these guys. Deborah and Barak are like going to town. And then Sisera runs over to the tent of Heber where he meets an unexpected person. Meanwhile, Sisera ran to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenite, because Heber's family was on friendly terms with King Jabin of Hazor. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, come into my tent, sir. Come in. Don't be afraid. So he went over to the tent. She covered him with a blanket. All right. So he's probably tired. He's been running away like a coward. And she's like, all right, I'll come and protect you. And he's like, okay, you go watch. I need some water, by the way. Can you please give me a drink of some water? She gives him some milk and then lays him back down in the bed. And then she goes to like take watch and to look out for the enemy. But while he falls asleep, she goes and takes a peg, like a stake that you would stab into the ground, and a hammer, goes over to this guy's head and nails the stake into his temple, and it pierces through his head into the ground while he's like down sleeping. I know the story's getting crazy. And then all of a sudden, Barak is like running to go and find Sisera. And then Jael calls out to Barak and says, I found the guy that you're looking for. Barak goes and finds Sisera nailed to the ground. And then the author of Judges writes, so on that day, Israel saw God defeat Jabin, the Canaanite king. And from that time on, Israel became stronger and stronger against King Jabin until they finally destroyed him. Now, I know that story was just nuts. And so I want to show you a few of the details that make it really worthwhile. So Heber is in his tent out in the middle of nowhere, really kind of out in the wilderness. That is not usual. That is a very weird thing that's happening in this story because in these ancient times, you want to stay with your people because it increases your chance of survival. If you were to leave and just go off on what looks like a camping trip, that guy could easily die. He could not have enough food, get lost, be attacked by thieves or robbers. And it's just not a good idea. Heber and Jael were likely outcast. They were people that were pushed away from their tribe. And they find themselves in the middle of this crazy battle. And Jael's response to defeat this guy is the fulfillment of what Deborah said to Barak. It looked like at first, Deborah was going to claim victory of this battle. But Jael is the person who was finally the person to defeat Sisera, all for the glory of the Lord, to fulfill the promise that this would be their land. What is so crazy about this story is that this commander of a huge army was defeated by an outcast. A woman defeated the leader of this huge, crazy army. This is something that we need to really pause and reflect on because it says something profound about the nature of God. In the Bible, we see God revealed in a lot of creative ways. In Genesis 16:13, Hagar, who is an Egyptian slave woman, is the first person to name God as El Roi, which means the one who sees me. So God wants humanity to know that we are seen and that God cares about us. And he did it by revealing God's self to an Egyptian slave girl. And God cares about the people that society thinks are the least important, like an outcast like Jael and Heber. But Jael, the wife, who is not typically seen as a soldier, especially in these times, is the one to conquer the army, essentially, or to declare victory in a sense. And then we also see Mary, who gives birth to Jesus. And the crazy thing about that story is that Mary was pregnant out of wedlock. And so it would look really, really promiscuous and dishonoring to her to give birth to this baby. So the God of the universe decided to step into human history in the household, the family of a mom who is very looked down upon. And then also, when Jesus, after being crucified, was resurrected, the message of resurrection was entrusted to women. So we wouldn't even know that God resurrected if it wasn't for women. And so what I want us to look at in this story, in the context of the greater biblical narrative, and how God has used the courage and wisdom of women throughout the Bible to bring about God's kingdom, God's purpose, is that society today, including the church, is failing in a lot of ways. We have all these expectations about how the battles are supposed to be won, how God is supposed to be preached, what messages are supposed to be communicated by particular people. But God, time and time again, uses the most unlikely and unsuspecting people to bring about God's purpose and God's plan. And so let that be a message of encouragement for us today. If you have ever felt like society is saying that you're not enough, you're not what we're looking for, you don't meet the standard, that God looks at you and says, I see you. I want to bring liberation and freedom and goodness, love, grace, peace, all of the beauty of God into this world. And God trusts you to be that vessel of grace. So do not listen to the world when they say, you're not good enough, you can't do this. God believes in you, and so do we. Gravity, we love you guys. We hope you have an amazing week. We'll have some discussion questions for you guys, and grace and peace.